Welcome to all of you. My name is Bruce Cunningham. I'm the Dean of the Sanford School of Public Policy. And on behalf of the school, I'd like to welcome all of you to the Sanford School and to the Sanford Distinguished Lecture. The Sanford Distinguished Lecture was endowed by a gift to Duke from the William R. Keenan Jr. Charitable Trust. Its purpose is to invite a distinguished person in public life to deliver a lecture to the Duke community and also to spend some time with Duke students, which our speaker just did. The language of the endowment fund notes that the Sanford lecturers shall be men and women of the highest personal and professional stature, such as presidents, prime ministers, and cabinet members, chief executive officers of corporations, visionary artists, and esteemed scholars. We view this lecture as our most prestigious because it honors both the founder of what has become the Sanford School and his extraordinary public service. Past Sanford lectures have included Nobel laureates and heads of state, such as Shimon Peres, Oscar Arias, Turgut Özal, Yasuhiro Nakasone, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, Senator Lugar, journalist Tom Friedman, former President of Duke Nan Cohan, and General Anthony Zinni. In discussing the format of this event, we decided as an alternative to a formal lecture to present a conversation with Secretary Napolitano, with two of our faculty as discussants. This more dynamic format might give the audience a better opportunity than a formal lecture to understand the thinking of one of our top government officials. Before asking David Price, a former faculty colleague at Sanford, and now our long-term and distinguished congressman from the 4th District of North Carolina, to introduce the Sanford Distinguished Lecturer and her faculty discussants, a few housekeeping matters. First, if there are people who can't find any room, we've opened up room 05 and 04. If you come down the stairs or the back way, you can get in there and see a video if you're so far back that you can't see. Secondly, if you have cell phones, please turn them off. If you are planning on taking a picture, you should do so within the next minute or two, because not only are they distracting, but we're trying to videotape this discussion, and it messes up the video. Third, I understand there's some groups present, such as Dream Team North Carolina, and individuals who have a profound and passionate interest in some of the issues that will be discussed today. And I just want to say that those passions are understandable, and we welcome your presence. But I'd like to remind everyone here that while this lecture is open to the public, and we welcome all of you, we're also committed to the principle of civil discourse, and we ask you to respect that principle. Fourth, after the conversation, Secretary Napolitano has agreed to take a few questions, and for that purpose, we'll have roving mics upstairs and downstairs. We ask that you keep your questions short and focused, and that they be questions. If a question begins to turn into a long statement, we'll exercise our authority as moderators to remind you that however important your concerns are to you, the forum has a larger agenda and the audience is here to listen to our speaker. And now I'd like to ask Congressman David Price to introduce our speaker and her discussants.
Thank you, Dean Bruce Cunningham. It's a real pleasure, kind of a homecoming for Lisa, my wife, and I to be back here at Duke tonight. I remember the early days of the Sanford School, and so does Bruce. And I assure you, we weren't meeting anywhere like this. We were subject to the whiff of chloroform in what had been a chemistry lab over on the main campus. But a lot has changed, and we have seen the Sanford School come about as a full-fledged school, and a lot of that is due to Bruce Cunningham's leadership. It was my privilege to be part of a small group of young faculty members, largely without much adult supervision, starting this program back in the 1970s. And I've never had a more interesting or exciting academic experience than really launching this program back during those years. So this is a moment of personal significance for me, because I'm able to welcome here a person I greatly admire and with whom I've enjoyed working these last years very productively. And for Duke to invite her to come, Secretary Napolitano, to come and give this distinguished title lecture. Gives me great satisfaction, and I'm honored to be part of the ceremonies in this role of introducing her. It's very fitting that this lecture be delivered by a leader who's mastered the art of translating ideas into public policy at nearly every level of government. I've worked with her in my capacity as chairman and now as ranking Democratic member of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Homeland Security, and that relationship has been a pleasure and a privilege every step of the way. I also want to introduce our chief clerk on the Democratic side of the committee is with us today. I want you to know that. Stephanie Gupta, who does great work on the subcommittee, has come down with the secretary today. Secretary Napolitano grew up in New York City. She, I guess she was a native of New York City, actually grew up other places, Pittsburgh, then Albuquerque. Studied at Santa Clara and up the road at the University of Virginia Law School. She found her true home in the state of Arizona, served as U.S. District Attorney there and Arizona's State Attorney General before beginning her distinguished service as governor. She was governor during a critical period for the state, a lot of population growth, economic growth, recognized as a national leader on Homeland Security and immigration issues. It was a very inspired choice for President Obama to choose Secretary Napolitano to head this new department as its third secretary. It was a good fit. It has proved to be a good fit and a very fortuitous choice. It was a very, very wise decision on the president's part. In addition to bringing just plain competency to this job, managerial competency and expertise of a two-term governor. That's an essential quality, believe me, in a young agency that's still struggling to pull together 22 disparate agencies into a functional, coherent department. Secretary's brought personal warmth to this job and a personal effectiveness, a strength of conviction, served us extremely well. And she, needless to say, is confronting some very, very challenging issues, very controversial issues. And she does it with a sense of fairness and an even-handedness and competency that is really served our country well. Now, we have some interlocutors today that are very well chosen as well. We're going to complement this discussion with Secretary Napolitano, David Chancellor, and Noah Pickus. Both are on the faculty of the Sanford School. Professor Chancellor also directs the Triangle Center on Terrorism and Homeland Security, and he serves as the co-director of the Institute for Homeland Security Solutions. He's brought to these endeavors a keen understanding of both politics and policy. I first knew him when he was the minority staff director of the authorizing committee in Washington, the Homeland Security Authorizing Committee. He came to North Carolina after that tour of duty and has served very, very well. Noah Pickus is the Kahan Professor, Director of the Duke's Canaan Institute for Ethics. He's an Associate Research Professor of Public Policy. He also co-directs the Brookings Duke Immigration Policy Roundtable, and especially in immigration policy. He's a well-known analyst and author. He's published 2 well-reviewed books on immigration and citizenship. So we have an exciting team and a good evening in prospect. And with that, I'll turn the proceedings over to David Chancellor to begin the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Price, and thank you for the students and faculty and members of the public. It's a great crowd here tonight. You've sold out the joint, Secretary Napolitano. It's great. Noah and I are very honored to have the chance to have this conversation with you, but I know you want to say a few words before we dive into the questions.
Well, I'll keep my words short because I think the discussion is probably in the end more valuable. A few things. First, Chairman Price, and you'll always be my chairman, so I will use the title, but it has been a joy to work with you these past almost 3 years now, so I thank you for that service. And I want to really thank the Sanford School for this invitation and for its willingness to engage with us and with the Department of Homeland Security on many levels, as you have. David and others here. I don't know whether Mac McCorkle is still in the audience, but someone who I knew back when I was actually in campaign mode myself, looking to him for policy ideas and wisdom, and that was great. I did wear the closest thing I owned to Duke blue, and I want the record to show that fact. So, even though I went to UVA, I'm not bitter. In any event, listen, I lead what is now the third largest department of the United States. It's 240,000 plus. We operate in the United States, in the interior, at the borders. We also operate in 75 countries of the world. Why? Because when you say Homeland Security, you're really talking about a blend of national security, international security, and hometown security. In fact, we often say Homeland Security begins with hometown security, that you need to have spread across the nation the ability to share information, to gather information, to be able to prepare for and respond to disasters, whatever their source. It could be a terrorist attack, it could be something else that is caused by man, it can be, as it has been very actively this year, Mother Nature. We have areas of responsibility that are too numerous to mention, but we have organized them into 5 central categories. Terrorism prevention, which includes a number of things. It includes our international focus, it includes information sharing and all that entails, and analytic sharing. It's not just data, it's analysis. Very important. It includes border security. Who is let into the country, what cargo is let into the country, via air, via land, via sea. And that is something where we increasingly see issues, for example, securing the global supply chain, reaching agreements with the European Union on the exchange of passenger information in the aviation environment, to give you 2 concrete examples. Immigration enforcement, an area that has strong feelings on all sides, but our duty is to enforce the law in a firm and a fair way, and we've made some changes there that we think are the right thing to do in this very controversial area, even as we seek and are willing to work collaboratively with the Congress whenever they signal that we need to update and reform the nation's immigration laws as a whole. Cybersecurity. We have a responsibility in the civilian side of the .gov domain. The Department of Defense has the military. We also have the intersection with the private sector. This is an area that is wide open. There are no international legal regimes really to follow, no international treaties that really make much operational difference. This is an area where we are being attacked on a regular basis, and among other things, a lot of theft is occurring of intellectual property, the thing that gives this country such an economic advantage in the world is our intellectual property and the jobs that IP creates, and we see that being stolen via cyber networks and cyber attacks. So cybersecurity, big area, growing area, where I think we're just beginning to touch the surface. And then last, disaster preparation and response, and the ability to do that and to do it multiple places simultaneously, quickly, and effectively. This spring, at one point, we were operating on federal disasters in 28 separate states at the same time. Every river system east of the Continental Divide was in 500-year flood stage. We had tornadoes that killed more people than at any time since 1953. It was a horrendous spring across this country. You saw the tail end of it with Hurricane Irene and Tropical Storm Lee as they came up the eastern seaboard, but we had many other things to deal with simultaneously. And I have 2 words I like to say. I want speed and I want mass on target. And that's what we tried to do in that difficult area and do it well. So, David, Noel, that gives you a sense of what our expanse is. It's almost easier to say what we don't do than what we do. We're new, we're young, we're learning. We are very anxious to engage with the university communities across the country, the people who are beginning to do some deep thinking into this emerging area, the merger really of international relations, national security, law enforcement, and disaster preparation and response. And that combination really has never been done by any country before until the creation of this department. I'm privileged to lead it. I like leading it. It's a challenge. It's fun, and it really is public service that I'm privileged to be able to do. And by the way, for the students here, these are tight fiscal times. The federal government is having to cut back all over. We are having to look at every dollar we spend, but we're still looking for good people to help us. And so keep us in mind as you think about your own career futures. This is a great place to think about a career in public service. It means a lot. All right, let's get at it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I'd like to touch on one of the themes you already began to mention. President Obama and the 43 predecessors in that office have identified providing security to the people as really the foremost responsibility of the federal government. And indeed, the preamble to our Constitution says that the nation was formed, our government was formed to provide for the common defense, among other goals. Yet you have discussed in a number of your other lectures around the country that it's not just the government, but communities and individuals actually have a responsibility, a duty to play in providing security. So I was wondering if you could elaborate that. Why is it that people can't just pay their taxes, pay for the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and then necessarily expect to be secure? Why should they have to do anything more than that?
Well, I think part of the philosophy underlying the government is also the social compact we have with each other for the enhancement of the common good. And moving beyond that, look, we deal with a very complicated, ever-evolving threat environment, and it entails many things. And so the whole goal is to maximize our ability to minimize risk and to maximize our ability to prevent something from happening. And that is a shared responsibility. For example, as we look at the evolution of terrorism as it was presumed when the department was created in the wake of the attacks of 9/11. The presumption was, or the paradigm was, a complex conspiracy formulated abroad with people from other lands coming into the country to commit an attack. Now, yes, we have some of that, but we also have the growing phenomenon of the so-called homegrown actor. The lone wolf actor, the person who may have been radicalized to violence, either Islamist or another violent extremism ideology, who decides to kill a bunch of people, plant a bomb along an MLK parade route in Spokane, Washington. We had that this year. Buy guns and go shoot at people as they tried to enter Fort Hood. We had that this year. And if we didn't have the concept of shared responsibility, both of those crimes might have been successful. Why? Because they were detected by individuals who said something to the law enforcement authorities about it. And that just tells you what shared responsibility means. It means individuals, they see something, they say something. That's the phrase we use. People are starting to pick it up because why? You can remember it easily. Everybody here can remember it. You will leave here saying, see something, say something. That's what saved us on MLK Day in Spokane. That's what saved those soldiers at Fort Hood. But it's also local police and first responders. Why? Because particularly in the domestic environment, they're likely to be the first preventer. That neighborhood police officer who knows that neighborhood and knows the people there and who the people in that neighborhood trust, oftentimes is the first person to receive information about something troublesome that may be occurring. That local police officer who we also train with the FBI on what's called the SARS initiative, Suspicious Activity Reporting, which is a defined protocol on what needs to be reported up the chain ultimately to us. So that shared responsibility underlies the philosophy of our government to begin with. You don't just hand it off to the government and wash your hands and say, I'm done. But secondly, it maximizes our opportunity to minimize risk.
Okay, let me examine an aspect of that, which the notion of see something, say something. And the idea that citizens should try to look across the horizon and see if they see indicators of potential criminal activity or terrorist activity. And I think you said in one of your speeches that that is something that people ought to try to do. And as you know, I do some research on the issue of homegrown terrorism and speak a lot with the Muslim American community and civil libertarians. And what some of them might say to me is that sure, if we see somebody loading explosives into the back of the SUV, we better say something about that. But oftentimes people don't really know what these indicators are, and they fall back onto stereotypes. Somebody who looks and talks like Osama bin Laden, or becomes highly religious all of a sudden, or maybe says things critical of US foreign policy, or about the treatment of Muslims around the world. Now, all of those things, though, are protected activities under our First Amendment. So my question to you really is, how do we continue this effort to find terrorists, find people who are likely to head towards violence, but also hold in respect freedom of religion and freedom of speech? It's a very hard balance to strike.
It is. And you know, this balance between security and privacy and civil liberties, it can be all the time. We actually have a privacy office and a civil liberties office within DHS who advise me all the time, who say, you know, Secretary, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And we try to that rigor into how we do things. By the Metropolitan Transportation in New York, 6-7 years ago. And they have found that there are several screens to the profiling you're suggesting. One, which have pre-existed these campaigns for a long time, to sift out what is simply somebody who doesn't like somebody or just mad at their neighbor or what have you, from something that really should require should require a little extra asking. And that's all it is a little extra asking.
What if that extra asking people see as unwarranted surveillance, or a community that feels that they're under constant suspicion by the government?
Well, I think this is an issue. I think, and I've met with leaders in the Muslim American community by way of example, and it's very interesting. It goes both ways. Where we have concentrations of populations, and they have a good connect with their local police, there is a trust that develops, which is why I keep saying, you know, hometown security. Those policing tactics that worked in the 80s and the 90s in African American neighborhoods to help bring down the rate of violent crime. Those are the same kinds of techniques that can be used now. But if there are issues of, and repeated issues of profiling, or discriminatory behavior, that is something then we ought to raise up. We ought to adjust, and if we need to, that's something then that the Department of Justice needs to look at.
Let me turn to another aspect of your job, which must be very difficult, which is how do you decide how much security is enough security? So we have when incidents occur or you're faced with a resource-constrained environment, and we're certainly in that now, yet we have threats in aviation. We have calls for greater border security. You know of all the different other types of threats. When you look and you have to decide, make decisions, and Congressman Price is an appropriator, is involved in this discussion, of course, as well. How do you decide where you put that last dollar of resources, or if it should be reallocated from one domain to the other? What is the way that you go about doing that?
Well, first of all, you're right. It's finite resources, and you have to accept that you will never eliminate every threat. Okay, so we know we're already dealing with a universe where what we're trying to do is maximize our ability to minimize risk. And I don't have, at least until Congressman Price tells me I do not have a never-ending pocket, right? It's called a budget. And I've got to figure out we've got to figure out how to do that. It involves a couple things. One is putting our resources where we evaluate risk to be the greatest. So we've put a lot into aviation, right? And any of you who have been in airports have experienced that. We do that because there's constant information about taking out aircraft, either a commercial airliner or through putting cargo on airliners, and to use a variety of means with which to do that. So you have the so-called underwear bomber who's currently on trial in Detroit, who tried to blow up a passenger airliner from Amsterdam to Detroit Christmas Day of '09. You have the most recently reported threat, which is in open source press, of surgically implanting bombs into suicide bombers so they can't be picked up. So, this is an area of active, ongoing, evolving threat, and that's why we've done some of the things that we have done. It's commensurate with threat. So that's one way you make decisions. Another way you make decisions is when you're putting a lot of money into something and it's not working, do you continue to put money into it? Why? Because the vendor, everybody he has friends in the department or in the Congress or what have you, or it sounds like a really good plan, or do you finally go in and say, you know what, we're just not going to continue to put good money after bad? And that kind of a decision usually gets to me. And so this year we canceled 2 very expensive programs that had been underway for a number of years. Why? Because they didn't meet our needs. They weren't working. They were over budget. They were out of contract compliance. But that meant that we had spent several hundred millions of your dollars that we probably were not going to be able to use operationally. However, we are going to be able to use other dollars in a much better way. So it's constant decision making is what we're doing commensurate with risk and threat. Is what we're buying, does it make sense? Does it work? Does it meet our operators' needs? And then finally, to think down the road proactively. What really makes sense in the long term? What research should we be supporting? What things should we be pilot testing that would help us meet our security demands, but at the same time do it more conveniently, more cheaply?
Let me ask this. If risk is the touchstone of our priorities, why don't we apply that, for example, when we're screening passengers in an airport? We know 2 things about terrorism, and we don't know very much about who the terrorists are or why they become terrorists, but the two things we can say with some certainty that they're predominantly male and they are predominantly young. So why don't we put more resources, if we're looking to try to eliminate risk, why don't we put more resources on looking at young men than older women, for example?
And you did not include me in that latter category, I presume. Okay, here's the deal. The minute you say that you are not looking at certain categories, you can pretty much bet that that category will be exploited by our adversaries and used. That's why we cannot just blanket exempt babies and diapers from checking. And by the way, internationally, they have been used as bombs, right? That's why we can't exempt grandmothers, people in wheelchairs, others that seem very non-risky to us, but nonetheless can be used. What we can do, however, is say, look, yes, they can be used, but we can deal with that a variety of ways. One is by always doing a certain amount of random checking so that predictability is never part of what the adversaries can use. And when we do that, we can start to begin making some divisions based on what we know about risk, so that now children under a certain age don't have to take their shoes off, all of them, when they get to the airport, although we will still random check a certain number. We began a program for international travelers where, in exchange for people giving us their biometrics and information about themselves so that we can check, and they become, in essence, known travelers, they get a card, it's called a global entry card, that facilitates their entry into the United States. And we are now pilot testing our ability to do that with domestic airline travel, which if the pilots are successful, then I hope over the next years or so we'll be able to expand that. So we are now moving into a more intelligence or risk-based approach to the whole problem of how do you move about 1.8 million travelers a day through the air and do it with a maximum of safety and security.
That it takes two of us just to divide up the work. So we shift here from a focus on security to a focus on immigration, though obviously in your work those two get intertwined. And I hope to, if we can lead through some questions on interior and border enforcement, as well as into legal immigration and comprehensive immigration reform. So one of the issues, as you know, that's very controversial today, and that just a report out of, I believe, Immigration and Customs Enforcement about deportations and greater emphasis and even record numbers of deportations taking place with, as I understand it, an intent to focus particularly on potential or actual record, those immigrants, illegal immigrants with criminal records. And this has gotten two kinds of responses. One has been that this is much too broad and that you are sweeping up people who are guilty of nothing more than a traffic violation and tearing apart families and making horrific kinds of situations. And the other, that it's much too narrow, that you're concentrating, and because of your concentration, you're leaving alone all the people here who are unauthorized. So how do you respond to being right there in the middle, and what are the greatest challenges that you face in managing that balance? Look,
I think I'm going to give you a little bit of a long answer because I think the question merits it. But you're right, you get it from all sides. And you better not be in this business unless you can take it, by the way. So, because you've got to make decisions that you think are fair and that make sense under a law that overall is badly in need of reform. But the Congress can't for whatever reason, they're not capable of taking up a topic like this right now. And so my job is to enforce this law. And this is what we are doing. We have the resources to remove from the country around 400,000 people a year, out of perhaps 10 million who are in the country illegally. Now, we could have a system where everybody, all illegals are fungible, and there's no clear prioritization set. But the plain fact of the matter is that when you actually go back to our legacy department, Immigration and Naturalization, INS, and you read the memoranda from the various directors of all Democratic or Republican administrations moving forward, they have all recognized that it's important to prioritize. And they have all said that discretion rests in the director, and they've all said that the top priority ought to be those who, in addition to being in the country illegally, are dangers to the public safety. And so what we have done is say, well, those are a priority, and we define those as those who have violated the criminal laws in addition to the immigration law. And I get the traffic offense question, and it turns out that is a very, you get this very small categories that anecdotally become condemnation of the entire system. But the plain fact of the matter is that as we have really begun that prioritization, we are beginning to see now the composition of who's in that 400,000 really change from what it was in, say, 2008. But they are not our only priorities. So those who are security threats obviously need to be removed, i.e. people who somehow have gotten in the country who are on a terrorist watch list. Those who are fugitives, those, for example, for whom we have outstanding warrants, they are a priority. Those who we pick up right at the border are a priority because we want to remove them before they get into the interior of the country. And then those who are repeat violators, who treat our immigration law like it's an invitation to a revolving door. It is not. So I think it's important to look not just at the overall number, but then who's in it, that composition. And I think over time, next year's numbers will be even more dramatic in this regard than this year's. Why? Because as individuals who have criminal convictions that are more serious felonies begin to complete their prison sentences, they'll start moving into the removal numbers, and you'll start seeing those serious felony numbers go up.
I think have found yourself in the middle of the line of fire, has been you and the President have been very supportive of the DREAM Act,
yes,
of the notion that for some undocumented minors, there ought to be a way currently to legalize their status. And you have taken the criticism here from, I don't want to say exactly from the right, but from conservatives or those who are concerned about illegal immigration, that you are not doing enough here, that this is an incentive for more people to come illegally, and that it rewards in an unfair way lawbreakers while others are waiting in line. And at the same time, as you well know, you're being told that you're not fighting enough, you're not doing enough to actually push it through. So take us through how you walk that line.
Yes. First of all, look, there's no stronger believer in the DREAM Act than I am. And I've believed in it for a long time. If we can't fix the overall immigration law, let's at least address those who were not culpable for being in the country illegally to begin with. So, let's deal with that fairly. And I think that notion has bipartisan support. It has historically had broad bipartisan support. Unfortunately, our politics have become so riven with partisanship that it's hard to bring the sides together and say, you're not going to send a kid home who's in the military or is doing everything we've asked of them, who may not even speak the language of their home country, because they were brought here by their parents, and their parents came illegally. Now, one issue there becomes, well, then you're making the U.S. a magnet, right? That so-called magnet argument. And the way I deal with this is I say, what part of recent border crossers don't you understand? Recent violators are a priority. So we are not we are not giving a magnet incentive to those who are rushing allegedly across our border. By the way, we've made crossing our border much more difficult. I've never seen the southwest border like it is today. I was born in New York City, but I actually grew up in New Mexico. And I've lived my adult life in Arizona, and I know that southwest border about as well as anybody you'll ever meet. And I've never seen it like this between manpower and equipment and technology and infrastructure. So it's very, very difficult to cross. And the way we've structured our priorities, it's a disincentive. It's not a magnet.
Well, your comments about growing up in New Mexico and border enforcement, I mean, as a former governor and now Secretary of Homeland Security, the border, as you know, is both enormously complicated technically as a matter of enforcement and politically and emotionally a very sensitive kind of issue.
I have noticed that.
You have noticed that. You've also said, I believe, that we want a secure border, but we're not going to have sealed borders.
That's right.
So what does that mean? What does it mean, and how will we know in this era of globalization that we would have secure borders? What is that? How, if we're looking at that, can we understand that?
I think what it means is, well, first of all, it means that we have coverage along the border. We have either aerial coverage or man coverage or technological coverage, but we have coverage along the border. It means that our ports of entry are very robust and facilitate the enormous amount of trade and commerce that needs to go back and forth between us and Canada, between us and Mexico, our number one and our number two trading partners, responsible for hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs in the United States. And it's that combination, security between the ports of entry, very robust land ports of entry, that I think is the mix that we want. And we'd have to do different things on the northern border than on the southern border. That's a huge border, very sparsely populated. The equipment needs to be able to work in a different weather environment. And we have, I think, in some respects, a greater role for technology up and down that border. We have very close partnerships with Canada as well. We have a very close partnership with Mexico and with the federal government there. But we have more ports of entry along that southwest border. And of course, we've had greater numbers of illegal immigration. And so our deployment and our deployment plan is different on that southern border. But I can tell you now from a southwest border perspective in particular, I've never seen it more secure than it is now. And one of the things I think we ought to really focus on now is on how do we make those land ports of entry bigger and better so that the legal traffic and tourism trade can move more quickly.
Well, and that raises the issue we've been focused on, illegal or unauthorized immigration, which, as you know, takes up a lot of space in the conversation. But the legal immigration system itself is one that many people on all sides of the debate have described as broken. And in particular, one of the issues that they focus on is the imbalance between legally the number of unskilled workers who come in, often because of family preferences, over and against the small number available for those with skilled visas, capabilities, skills.
Yeah.
So where do you stand on that issue? Is this something that you think ought to be reprioritized and to give more attention to skilled visas? We have an issue right now where there's a lot of debate over the competition or the ostensible competition between low-skilled immigrants coming legally and native-born citizens and a 10% employment rate.
Right. Well, I think that it is very hard to explain politically why you want to increase the number of worker visas when you have a high unemployment rate. So I'll let Chairman Price do that. But I think that it's very interesting. If you really look at this, you have whole sectors of the economy now coming in to Washington, D.C. saying, I can't get enough people. I own orchards in Washington State. I'm leaving crops in the fields. I own fields in California. I'm selling them and moving my place to Mexico. I need more high-tech workers, or else I'm going to have to move my factory overseas. These pleas are being made time and time and time again. Really, the only answer there is a political one, because only really ultimately the Congress can make some of those adjustments. What we can do on the legal side is try to be more user-friendly, try to streamline some of the paperwork, try to do more things online, you know, all of those kinds of business processes to try to make that legal process easier. We started a one-stop shop site for students who are here from foreign countries in terms of what they need to be watching for and their visas and things they can do. So there's one place they need to go on the net to get that information, and it's interactive, you can put questions there. So doing some of that, but in the end, that balance of worker, visa, how much you want or not, is one for the Congress. I will say this, however. An economy that is not growing is an economy that is dying. And if you look at the projections on the U.S. need for a labor force and the mix in that labor force over the next years, over the long term, we are going to have to address our immigration dilemma so that the economy can grow. That's got to have to be part of the solution to the economic hole we find ourselves in now.
Well, let me ask one more question along those lines that tries to, as valiantly as I can, draw you out on the larger political and immigration complications that we exist in. Because everything we've been talking about, deportations, education, border enforcement, legal immigration, as you've indicated, all their sense is downstream from the larger issues upstream of how that all fits together, of what vision we want to have with regard to unauthorized immigration, with regard to the economy and employment, with regard to respect for the rule of law. And you know where this is going. This is what in Washington is called comprehensive immigration reform, which has been a very difficult subject to get solved. And I want to draw you out on, if you can do the best you can making these difficult decisions at each step, balancing values, balancing strategies, balancing budgets, but all of it is still subject to Congress and the nation having some understanding of what it really wants in an immigration policy overall. What I want to try and understand from you is, you and the President, I think, support a comprehensive effort to resolve the immigration conflicts. But it's not an easy thing to do. And I'm telling you.
Details at 11.
Details. Okay. So what are the trade-offs that are going to have to be made? What are the hard pills that the President's going to have to swallow, that those you're trying to get in Congress to come to the table on this are going to have to swallow? Because at least it seems to me that absent some real hard trade-offs, we're going to stay like this for a while. And that's actually the other question. Do you think a grand bargain is possible? It doesn't seem possible in any part of our politics. Is it possible in immigration, which is, if anything, even harder to get agreement? What do we do here?
Well, I think, first of all, a couple of things. One is, I think the President feels very strongly on what needs to happen with the immigration law in terms of what it needs to look like now and for the future to be a good, strong, and fair immigration policy for the United States. I obviously agree with him and think that the direction he is going is absolutely the right direction, where you have strong border enforcement and smart enforcement in the interior of the country, where you have visa reform, and really deal with that. And then we have to reach a solution on those who are already in the country illegally. Why? Because this country is never going to put the resources into what it would really take if we're to deport 10 million people. We're not going to do it. So by not dealing with overall immigration, we're kind of giving a wink and a nod to the fact that we already have people in the country illegally. So the need for reform is manifest. I also think what you said is where we start, which is immigration has to be a function of the rule of law. And the way ultimately to move the political system is that the polity, the people at large, have to believe that the rule of law is going to be enforced. You have to have confidence in that. And one of the problems we have is that after the last grand bargain in 1986, there wasn't that follow-up, there wasn't that enforcement, and so people have begun to distrust the fact the immigration law will be enforced. I believe what I am doing now, what we are doing now collectively, is demonstrating, no, we believe strongly in the rule of law. We are making good decisions and tough decisions. We are securing our border. We are focusing our deportation resources in the right way, albeit not to the exclusion of any total category, because that can only be done by the Congress. And we are doing all we can to advocate for immigration reform. That basis is going to have to continue to be out there to ultimately move these wheels in D.C.
Let me ask one last question, and then we're going to turn to the audience. And this builds on this deadlock we're having over immigration reform, and tries to pull on maybe not your experience as Secretary of Homeland Security, but on your broader experience as a major player in our political scene. And I think what I want to talk about briefly is what many people feel when looking at our politics these days, which is in many ways a dysfunctional. A government that does not seem able at the moment to take on big challenges and solve difficult problems. And preparing for today, I watched a number of videos of your appearances, oftentimes with Secretary Ridge and Secretary Chertoff, your two Republican predecessors. And it's very clear that you have mutual respect for each other and you rely on each other for advice. And that's very refreshing. And I wanted to ask you, based on your experiences, what can we do in Washington to try to make our political system get back to the principle of trying to solve problems, as opposed to some of the things that we see and people don't like what they see often in Washington these days?
Well, boy, first of all, I do have enormous respect for my two predecessors. It is not easy to start a large new department like the Department of Homeland Security. It is, and they're the only other two people in the world who really know what it's like day in and day out. So you're right, we are a very small association, and we do appreciate each other. It's not to say we're identical. It's not to say that we prioritize exactly the same things, but we all appreciate the job that has to be done. Look, I believe strongly in this president. Obviously, I left the governorship to come be in his cabinet. It's one of the greatest honors of my life. And he's trying to do the right thing. The Congress itself is a body that was built, if you read the papers and you read it's built on the notion that reasonable people, at that time men, but we know but broaden that out, but reasonable people debating reasonably can reach reasonable compromises, and that no one has a monopoly on good ideas. And until we retreat to, in the congressional level, to that sort of original intent, we're going to have problems. And unfortunately, in an election year, that is a very difficult time to do that. So in the meantime, we can either, just pick up our ball and go home, or you say, look, we have a job to do. We have a job to do to secure the country. We have a job to do to secure the borders. We have a job to do to enforce the immigration law. We have a job to do to protect United States interests in the cyber world. We have a job to do to help people recover from disasters. And I hope at some point the Congress is able to move forward and deal with some of these more complex issues. But in the meantime, that's what we are going to focus on.
Thank you for that. I think it's time to have some questions from our audience. I believe that Dean Cunnahome has a microphone on this floor. I know that Karen Kemp is on the next level, and so if we have a questioner who'd like to indicate their desire to pose a question to Secretary Napolitano. Well, Karen, are we ready for one up there?
Rob, we are ready. I'm going to hold it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary. My name is David Litt. I'm a retired Foreign Service officer and former diplomat in residence here at Duke. My question is to ask you to expand a little bit on the presence of DHS overseas. You talked about being in 75 countries. I recall when I was serving at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad 6 years ago, it was really hard for the department, DHS, to maintain just a handful of agents who were doing some great work out there because DHS argued it didn't have a mandate to be overseas and didn't have the resources. But apparently something has changed. What has changed and what do they do over there? Thank you.
Yeah, David, thank you. Well, first of all, the international presence has just become more robust. Oftentimes it's paid for through the State Department, and those arrangements have become more secure. There are other methods of payment as well. It's a variety of things. It typically, and it depends on the place. We're in Afghanistan now, training Afghans on how to have a customs service. That's important because, you know, when we leave Afghanistan, they have to be able to have a civil government, and a civil government needs a source of revenue, and one logical source of revenue for them are customs duties. But you got to have ports, and you got to have a way to collect them and keep track of them and the like. So we're helping them create that, and that fits into the overall U.S. Strategy. I spent New Year's Eve in Afghanistan, but that's another story. But in any event, some places it's a combination of TSA, ICE, TSA you all know of, ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, CBP. We do a huge amount in the global seaport environment with respect to securing cargo that is allowed to come into the country. Coast Guard, we have Coast Guard all over the world, not just along the physical littorals of the United States. So what's happened is as the role of Homeland Security has achieved greater understanding, its intersection in the international environment has become, I think, more greatly appreciated. And the other thing I would add is one of the things that's happened, it's really, I think, only in the past several years, there's a whole area of the conduct of foreign policy that's now not done by foreign ministers and secretaries of state, but it's done by ministers of interior, home secretaries, homeland security secretaries, and it's all agreements involving the sharing of information in the security environment.
Okay, we have a couple questions over here. First you, and then you. Please identify yourself. Sure.
Secretary Napolitano, welcome to Duke. My name is Abdullah Antepli. I'm the Blue Devil Imam here, the Muslim chaplain. Two quick questions. Do you think rising Islamophobia is a real serious concern? Islamophobia as defined as anti-Islam, anti-Muslim sentiments in our society here, which we were able to see the elements of it in response to Park 51 controversy and the Quran burning show in Florida, etc. Do you think there's a real concern of a rising Islamophobia in our society? The second question is, after what happened in Norway, has there been any policy change, paradigm shift at the DHS? Because this gentleman apparently was feeding himself with the kind of information which was cooked, spread here in the United States. In our way to pay attention to the potentially people who can sort of become radical or criminal towards one group or another, has there been any change in the Department of Homeland Security after what happened in Norway? Thank you.
I think that, and I'm so glad you're here to have this discussion. I hope we are not seeing a rise in Islamophobia. I think that we should be facilitating education, understanding, respect in that fashion. We have and have done a number of outreach activities in different Muslim American communities across the country. But I think it's very important that we understand that those who are jihadists or Islamists really are not Muslim in that regard, and there's a real big difference. So that's number one. Number two, we do our intel and analysis based on what comes in. So we don't specifically say you will gather intel about these kinds of extremists, and then these kind of extremists, and then these kind of extremists. It's more what is coming in, how does it fit into a larger picture, and what does it mean for the United States, and what needs to be shared out to, say, state and local law enforcement. So in that regard, we really haven't made direct changes in reaction to what happened in the tragedy in Norway. Who's next?
There's a question. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Up here?
We're up here, yep.
Yes, Secretary, my name is Gunther Peck, and I teach in public policy here. My question is about human trafficking and in some ways, the cross purposes to which our bureaucracies are trying to fight this problem. And I'm wondering what the Department of Homeland Security can do, quite apart from the partisan. I mean, this is one of the few bipartisan areas of effort and agreement today is to stop the growth of human trafficking. But one of the problems is in identifying the trafficked victim and in effect getting them to, in effect, trust authorities to tell their story before being deported. And so that, in effect, the enforcement of immigration policy can actually abet the very problem you're seeking to stop. So I'm wondering how, within the bureaucracy, you're seeking to address this issue, and that's really a kind of internal bureaucratic question and reform. And how have you dealt with it?
Well, it's internal and it's external. Two things. One is the victim issue is a real issue. Those who are in the country illegally, by whatever means, tend to be very reticent to come forward and report crimes anyway for fear of deportation. And trafficking victims, many of them, they've been so exploited, and many times they don't speak the language, they don't have independent financial resources. I mean, they are truly alone. So we have been through something we call the Blue Campaign, working in this area. We've been working with the State Department on education. We have been providing information at the land ports of entry. We've been educating our own guys what to watch out for. We've been providing victim information in shoe cards, so victims can get home, phone numbers that they can take. We are spreading the word through our shop about the use of T visas, which allow trafficking victims to remain in country. And we have been working with some celebrity types to help spread the word about anti-trafficking, most recently a series of spots with Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher. So, anyway,
I agree.
So yeah, and then last but not least, ICE in their international activities. One of the major areas of emphasis for them is identifying, working with the State Department, the FBI, foreign intel and law enforcement to identify traffickers abroad who are feeding victims into the United States. So we've done some pretty big cases over the last year.
Yes, hi. My name is Alicia Torres, and I'm here with Griselda de los Santos. And I'm basically going to read a question that she had, but due to time constraints, I would just ask her in English. Says, my brother Javier was detained on September 6th for driving without a license plate light. He spent 2 weeks in jail before being transferred to Georgia. He has lived in North Carolina for a decade. His wife was 7 months pregnant. Because of the added stress, she went into labor earlier this month, and the child was born 3 weeks premature. The child now has health complications. My brother has done nothing wrong. He is not a criminal. He should be home with his wife and his newborn child. In this envelope, I have over 2,000 signatures from people all across the country who are rallying behind Javier. And her question is, I want to know if my brother will be released to his wife and newborn, based on the fact that he qualifies for prosecutorial discretion. He's not a criminal. He's done nothing wrong. And the question there lies into the fact that what national officers are saying is the law is very different from what is being practiced on a local level with ICE offices. And so we want to know, we as being part of the community that suffers that collateral damage, how do you stand behind us and support us and say, this is the law, local ICE offices, we are here to protect everybody equally. How would you plan on addressing that issue, and how soon? Because we are in pain and we're suffering. Thank you.
Fine, and if the envelope you have contains information, let's make sure I get it. Thank you. Yeah, I think, whenever you're managing a large national organization, right, you need to make sure that changes in policy and guidance get out across the whole field. You can get them a 20-yard line and 10-yard line, but sometimes that last 10 can be tough. We've issued guidance to the field, both to the ICE agents in charge, but also to the lawyers. They're called OPLA. That's the division. It's called OPLA. That's the acronym. About the appropriate use of discretion. And we are beginning to, and will in the next couple of weeks, begin the process of sifting through the 300,000 plus cases that are already in the system. So we'll pilot it in a few places. We need to deal with logistics. How does the paperwork really flow? Where is the best place to really stop or look at something? And then once we're sure we've got that nailed, that will be deployed to all the OPLA offices.
Okay, we have time for one more question. There's somebody already up there on the mic.
These folks want to introduce themselves these folks want to introduce themselves. There's two of them, but one questioner.
Hello, my name is Wooten, and I'm from El Cambio.
And I'm Giovanna Hurtado, and I am undocumented and also a dreamer.
And first, we would like to thank Secretary Napolitano for being so supportive of the DREAM Act in the past, and even saying that would help the Homeland Security. My question is, since Congress failed the DREAM Act, do you think something like an executive order providing protective status for DREAM Act beneficiaries would also help Homeland Security?
The answer is that the President has said, and I agree with him, that this is not something that can be solved by an executive order. I mean, we have the ability to set priorities. Any prosecution office does. Prosecution offices do this all the time. We don't have the ability to say by executive fiat, and we're not going to do this entire group of cases. That only the Congress can address. Otherwise, you really do run into you begin running into separation of powers concerns. So we've set real priorities. The numbers are being changed to reflect the priorities. We're beginning to see that ship turn. They're the right priorities. They're common sense. They're good law enforcement. But it doesn't mean that all dreamers we will never see a dreamer in the system, unfortunately. And I appreciate that. And so we all need to be continuing to advocate that Congress, if they can't get to the whole picture, at least address that issue. And until recently, there was broad bipartisan support for it. So, you know, that may be something that can occur.
All right. Okay.
We just wanted to ask you to return to something you said at the very beginning about public service. We've been talking about gridlock here. We've been talking about some very difficult choices that members of the community face and that you face in balancing. What can you say to our students here about how they can think about the service that the nation needs and their preparation for it?
Well, I would say to the students here that, you know, everybody has choices. If you're a student at Duke, you probably have lots of different types of roads that you can take. But the public service road is very fulfilling. It's very challenging. It demands the most of you intellectually. It demands a lot of times a lot of your stamina. And it demands that you constantly be thinking and be thinking about something that's bigger than yourself. And that, in the end, is what public service is about. So as you contemplate your careers and your futures, I hope you will seriously consider that. And I always like to give the question, when you're 85 or 90 and you're in your rock, back on your long and productive life, what is it that you want to have said you spent your intelligence and your talents on? And how did you make the country a better place? And so those kinds of questions are ones that logically lead you to a public service career.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.